Welcome to the Aero Club of Washington's Runway Program webinar, Conversations with General Lloyd Newton. My name is Callie Hague. I'm a partner at Jetlaw, and I'm the Runway Program Chair. Sierra Grimes is the Senior Manager, Registration and Programs, Convention and Membership at NBAA, and she is a member of the Runway Program's leadership team. We are both excited for this opportunity to talk with General Newton. General Lloyd "Fig" Newton is a command pilot that flew 269 combat missions during the Vietnam War, and he has more than 4,000 flight hours. He was also the first African American to become a pilot for the Thunderbirds. He is truly a pilot's pilot. He earned a degree in aviation education and commissioned as a second lieutenant from the Tennessee State University. Following his graduation and pursuing his deep interest in aviation, he completed pilot training and became a fighter pilot in the F-4D Phantom II. He flew combat missions during Vietnam War, 79 of which were over North Vietnam. General Newton aspired to become a member of the elite demonstration team, the Thunderbirds, and he achieved his dream and became the first African American member. After leaving the team, he was an Air Force liaison to the House of Representatives. He served as the Director of Operations, United States Special Operations Command, and as an Assistant Vice Chief of Staff. His career in the Air Force culminated as Commander of Air Education and Training Command, where he was responsible for the recruiting, training, and education of all Air Force personnel. General Newton retired in 2000 as a four-star general. Following his Air Force career, he worked with Pratt & Whitney as an Executive Vice President of International Military Programs and Business Development. He formerly served as a board chair of the National Business Aviation Association and currently serves on the board of L3 Harris Technologies, Inc. General Newton was also awarded the very prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the Air Force Association. General Newton, we're so glad to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon.
Well, thanks, Callie. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you, and particularly all of our participants that are out there online.
And for all of the participants, you will see a chat button at the bottom of this webinar. We encourage you to ask your questions throughout the webinar, and this is a conversation, and we look forward to asking your questions to General Newton.
Great, we look forward to it.
Thank you again, General Newton. As Callie stated, we're so excited that you took the time to sit with our Runway program today. All of our members of the Runway program are so excited to learn from you. We know that this is a critical time for a lot of young professionals within our aviation industry. And we know that with your extensive career, there are so many different lessons that we can learn. And we really want to take that conversation there today. So we have to start off with, why aviation?
Well, why aviation for me? That's a very interesting question, because when I first finished high school and left to go to college at Tennessee State in Nashville, Tennessee, aviation wasn't any place in that picture. The only part of aviation I knew I wanted to be in Air Force ROTC. And so, but when I arrived at Tennessee State, I was originally in an engineering track, but they offered aviation education at the school. And a friend of mine was in the aviation program, and he had all of these exciting stories to tell. Well, sitting in what I would consider at that point my boring engineering classes, aviation just sounded a lot more exciting. So I changed my major and went over to aviation. Not only did my grades in school got a lot better because I was doing something I was really interested in, but that was my first time being interested in aviation. And I will also admit it was the first time I've ever ridden in an aircraft was when I was in college.
That's amazing. I think one of the amazing things about the aviation industry is that even with our panel right here, the diverse backgrounds of how people get into the industry is always what amazes me. We have Callie, who has been a true aviator, knew what she wanted to do since she was a young kid. You didn't know aviation until you got to Tennessee State. Myself, I was introduced to aviation after school with the career within NBAA. And so how does that work when it comes to recruiting within our industry? How beneficial is it that we get the messaging of our industry out to people of those different backgrounds?
Well, I think you've really just pointed to it, just because I found that aviation is so exciting, and there are so many other career fields that touches aviation as well, or maybe the other way around, that aviation touches those career fields. I mean, if we think about Callie, for instance, over in the legal side of business, well, guess what? That is so important to aviation. So, and even when I was in the United States Air Force, we took people into aviation from all different backgrounds of studies that they had when they were in college, whether it was teaching, whether it was in engineering, whether it was in whatever. All they needed to do was have a degree and a desire and an aptitude to learn how to fly, and they became an aviator, and many of them, some of the best. So it is such a diverse and broad and exciting career field. And that's why I would say once you introduce someone to it, if they find that that's the connect and they get a passion for it, they can be very, very successful here.
General, I think you touched on a really important point, that aviation touches a lot of other careers, and that, you know, in the civilian part of aviation, there's not a defined track for most careers in aviation, but most of us have, once we found a way into the industry, our role in the industry has evolved over time, just as yours has in your two different careers. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how, you know, we're going through such a big time of change right now in the country with COVID and many other things that are going on. For someone that's looking at where they are today in their aviation career and thinking, maybe I need to pivot, maybe I need to change this, what's your advice for how to navigate that and how to see where your career might transition or translate to something else?
Yeah, thanks. Another really important question, I think, and that is because aviation is so dynamic. In my mind, there's nothing static about aviation. It's almost like going out to fly itself. Doesn't make any difference how many times you go out and fly. The next time you go out, it's going to be a new experience. It's going to be a new experience because the weather changed, you know, the temperature changed, something changed that's going to cause it to be a different experience every time you go out. This career field, I found, is very much that way. Over this period of time, and I need not, most folks have already guessed that I've been around for at least a little while anyway. But you know, as long as I've been in this career field, I've seen many folks who felt like, oops, you know, I've gotten to the outer edge and now I need to change and go into a different career field, because I think this aviation, and I might even add aerospace into that, is getting to its maturity. And then guess what? New technologies come along, the whole field starts to explode again, and it's a whole new opportunity set for people who would love to get in this kind of exciting business. So I've seen exactly where we are right now, a different set of circumstances, but it comes up with the same kind of results, so to speak. It looks like, well, we may be in this aviation and in this aerospace arena has reached our maximum potential. Far from it. You know, with the change in technology, from digital design to we are you know, just think about this. When I first stepped in the Air Force, you know, we were just coming out of that propeller age, and we're moving then into jets, and from then we've moved into space, and now we're into electrical, and next and right on the, you know, the steps of solar, how you power these machines, and all of the other exciting things that come along with that. So what I usually say to people, just stand by. I guarantee you it's something else is going to happen, and there's a place for you in this community. So I would say don't jump too quick. And whatever you go to do, you can either find other areas that you can combine with this, and again, continue to make a career while you still have your hands into aviation and aerospace.
Now, I think that's a really good point. Callie alluded to the pivot that a lot of young people feel that they're facing, because this may be the first time that they've had something that has been a really massive, or a pandemic, or something that's really been a challenge in their actual career. With that being said, one thing about your story that always sticks out to me is how you said the day that you were set to leave for the Air Force was the day of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And you were faced with the critical decision of being torn of whether to make the decision to go or not go. And in hindsight, you look back and that was still a great decision to make. How would you use what you learned in that moment to encourage the young people that are trying to stay the course within aviation, with the horizon that there's so much that could be in the future, but really trying to figure out how to navigate the current place that they're in right now?
Yeah, let me give a little bit of background and one correction. I was on my way to Vietnam instead of coming into the Air Force, but the same principles apply. And so there I was, about to go off to war in Vietnam, and the country was going through, this is back in the 60s, and so we were going through massive, racial strife in the country. And it's amazing that we're finding ourselves right at that same place again, right here in 2020. And many of the folks that are on the line can certainly understand and relate to that. But that was on the day I was programmed to depart from San Francisco and go to Vietnam. And Dr. King got killed, one of my great heroes. So, there was great conflict in my mind about whether I should be in Vietnam or whether I should be here in the States to work this problem, to fight this problem, and so on. However, I made the decision to do what I'd already committed to the Air Force that I was going to do. And it was the right decision. And I learned so much while I was in Vietnam, a lot about myself, a lot about the colleagues that I work with, a lot about the enemy, a lot about how to fly, where to fly, and when to fly. And so all of that lesson came together. And what it told me is, whenever you find yourself at that point of indecision, you really need to step back, I think, and do a bit of assessment and say, okay, what do I really think is best for me? And use your gut feel at that point, and then do it. But when you go to do it, you have to put your whole soul and heart into this. Don't go at it half-hearted and say, well, I wish I'd done that, but I'm over here, but I wish I'd done that. Just go for it. And I can almost guarantee you, every single time you do that, it's going to come out positive for you. At least it's been positive for me. And I've been there, I can tell you, far more than just that one time when I was leaving to go to Vietnam. All throughout my career, there would be these times when things would come up, and it looks like just this massive roadblock, and bang, something else happens. People reach out, give you a hand. You find a way to navigate your way around it, through it, or over it, and you're going to be successful on the other side. If I can say anything, just don't give up. That's just totally unacceptable. Just say to yourself, this is not a moment when I'm going to give up.
So you're a student of history, and as you just mentioned, this isn't the first time the country's gone through turmoil. And it's not the first downturn in the aviation industry either. And back in December and January and February, we were looking at an unprecedented pilot shortage that the industry thought was going to be extending for maybe a decade or more. And it was a really exciting time for young people to be coming into the industry, regardless of what position or career they were looking at. And that really changed overnight. And I was talking with a friend who works with young people, and the friend wondered if it was disingenuous to be encouraging young people to come into the industry with, no clear promise of a job as a pilot or maybe mechanic for a while. But if you look back over, the last however many decades, you can see that this isn't unique to the industry. It is cyclical. And so I was wondering if you could just speak to that, and what other, events in aviation in your career you've seen that might be similar to this, but not, you know, not necessarily a reason to not consider this industry as a
Sure.
long-term option.
Sure. I think there are a couple of ways we can look at this. I mean, I think we all feel very certain that we're going to work our way to an end of this particular pandemic.
Yes.
And the next one that comes along, I'll guarantee you, we'll be much better prepared for it. There's little doubt in Fig Newton's mind that that's going to happen. Back to aviation, though, you're absolutely correct. I mean, you know, when we came out of, quote, quote, World War II, and someone is saying, boy, is he that old? I mean, no, I wasn't in World War II, but that part of history, I mean, we downsized drastically, particularly in military aviation. But then we got into this great industrial growth, and look what happened. I mean, you know, we started just building all kinds of airplanes. There were all kinds of opportunities. Pilot shortages are one of those things that come along quite regularly for us. And I anticipate out of this, we will find, like I said, we will get beyond the pandemic. It will cause us to change aviation a bit, but we'll find a new flight path. We'll find a different runway to take off on. Some of those may be much shorter than the ones we needed or had before. But there will, in my mind, there will always be these opportunities that are there. That is maybe not aviation specific that we understand and see today, but it will still be aviation, aerospace. I think we are just now beginning to be on the brink of another real exploration out in the space, and I'm telling what that may bring in a very different form for us. So I'm excited about that. I would like to, I usually tell youngsters, no matter whether they're still in high school, college, or whether they're in the earlier parts of their career, I'll trade places with you right now if you could make me as young as you are. I would love to have that opportunity to start all over again.
So you spoke about how our recovery post-COVID or post this pandemic we may have to change our flight plan. A lot of things with this younger generation has to do with change. We know that people are very passionate about certain things. One of those new things, which is a big topic within our industry, is sustainability. You've been a very big advocate for our industry and led a lot of change throughout the industry in your places as being in the board of directors for various companies. What is your viewpoint on sustainability and what our industry is doing with its efforts so far?
Yeah. Two parts to that. With reference to sustainability, I think what happens there is too many times there are people who want things to stay just the same as they've been for the last number of years. Aviation for sure is not that way. Aviation changes all the time. I spoke to that a little bit earlier. And I really don't think our nation and our world, the society itself, it's changing all the time. And I think we got to be much more willing to embrace change. What's really going to happen, I think, is change is going to accelerate, okay? And if you don't stay up with that acceleration, you're going to fall behind and you're going to lose. Our new chief of staff of the Air Force, his theme that he's given to his troops in the Air Force is accelerate and accelerate now or we'll lose. And I think that's a fair statement. And so our lives, I think we're going to find that there's going to be change. And when we talk about sustainability, whether we're talking about things in the environment and how should we use different kinds of fuels, different kinds of products that are more friendly, I think we have to step up and learn about those, be educated on those, and be willing, just like when, I can imagine when someone said, well, guess what? I'm going to launch you in this jet aircraft. No, wait a minute. We had propellers all this long time. What do you mean you're going to launch me in a jet aircraft, And just like we made that transition, we will make this transition as well. And many of these others, both internal to aviation as well as external to aviation, we've got to be on a growth path and it's going to accelerate. And we need to embrace that acceleration because like I said, it is the kind of technologies that are coming along with the type of computing technology that comes along that will allow us to do these kinds of things. I'm sure many of our listeners are listening to us out there. They know exactly and much more about it than even what I know.
So I think a lot of young people are looking at the industry and seeing, this exciting change and really revolution in technology that we haven't seen for a while in the industry, where we're looking at eVTOL and, more prevalent use of drones. But for many people who are already pilots or who want to do what you did and be a pilot, that part of the industry is shrinking. And so for someone that wants to go that route, what is your recommendation for making their career such that if we see a big move towards unmanned or maybe even just single pilot operations in airlines and beyond, to make their career still viable?
Yeah, I'm one of those ones that I just couldn't get my head around. I couldn't imagine you're going to take some drone and you're going to go out and do the work that I was doing in an F-16, Come on, give me a break. I love being in the F-16, so let's not do that. Well, guess what? Like I said, things change all the time, and I have to come to grips with, not only will drones come along and, uninhabited vehicles will come along, and the fact that we can do so many other things with them. And we see that both in a military application as well in a much more commercial and civilian application, where we can do these kind of extraordinary things. I mean, the fact, you mentioned in your introduction that I was engaged in war in Vietnam, and there we were flying F-4 Phantoms, and it was the frontline fighter at that time. Man, I thought I was just, the hottest thing there was, because I was flying the frontline fighter. Well, like I said, it was hard for me to get my head around the fact that we can have an individual, a very junior individual, as a matter of fact, sitting here in the United States, and they're going to make a strike 8,000 miles away, okay? And they do that with high precision, much higher precision than I did in my F-4 Phantom, I can tell you that. It took us hundreds of airplanes to take out a bridge in Vietnam. Today, that same bridge, we'll take it out with one airplane and one, maybe two bombs, same bridge, okay? So that's the drastic growth and change in technology that we've had. So with that in mind, again, there's going to continue to be these opportunities. And so we will reach new platforms and new technologies that will come along. And yeah, when I was first coming in, and we would hear these great stories from folks pilots who had had a career in the Air Force, and they were in World War II and in the Korean War. Well, guess what? I couldn't go back and fly those aircraft in the Air Force I was in at that time. And so what I suggest is, you will find these new machines and new applications that will come along. You'll be able to use those. But even today, and Callie, I'm sure you can identify with this, we still go back, find some of those airplanes that were used in eras past, and still go out and enjoy those. So we get to experience that full spectrum of how aviation was developed.
That's perfect. Now, you brought about the example of junior members coming in and when you were in the Air Force and doing strikes. Now, one thing that the constant conversation is how the innovation and change that's needed for many industries, not just aviation, to recover from this pandemic will be led by the efforts of the young people within their industries. Do you believe this philosophy? And if so, how would you encourage young professionals to put themselves into the proper position to be the leaders of the change that we're seeking and looking for with our new opportunities in aviation?
Well, I think we're already seeing that change. Again, when for many of, let me use school, for instance, and I'm namely talking about high school. And so when we had to go to this virtual environment, well, our instructors who had to really develop these processes so that youngsters could be at home and still engage in lesson, they had to develop that. And they did it just like that. And they led the efforts in that. I can assure you, I sit on a school board. I can assure you, it wasn't old guys like me that came along and said, well, now let me tell you what we're going to do. No, it was young people who were saying, guess what? We can be on computers. We can make it live. Just exactly what we're doing right now. I mean, we are using Zoom and any number of other platforms to still communicate with each other and still get work done. To me, that's led by, young people all over the globe. And because we're in this global environment, we're no longer just, more of an isolated state, so to speak, but we're in this global environment. We're talking, and young people are talking to each other all around the globe, and they're going to develop these platforms and these processes such that, yes, we're going to recover. And it's not going to be led by folks like me. It's going to be led by folks like all of you and many that are on this chat with us today. So I firmly believe that.
So speaking of young people, you mentioned you're on a school board and you've been very involved with a charter school that has an aviation track. Can you tell us about that process?
How much time do you have? Yes, I am. And I'll start by saying, I know how important education was to me. I grew up in a little farm, country town here in South Carolina, and not knowing anything really about real technology. Like I said, I had my first airplane flight when I was in college. So I've always had an interest, and my parents really, taught me that as well, of how important education was. So here in the last 5 years or so, I got introduced to a project that a group of folks were trying to put together, a charter school that specialized in and focused in 6 different areas. And those were information technology, health services, business management, aviation, logistics, and manufacturing. And so when they first approached me with this and they gave me those 6, and then they asked me, was I interested? And I paused for a moment and said, is this a trick question? And so they kind of chuckled at that. And I said, well, you're talking aviation and you're talking education. I'm vitally interested in both of those. So yes, I would like to come aboard. And as it turns out, first thing I wanted to do was find out what was their interest in doing this. It's just a money-making deal, or just what were they interested in? Well, as it turned out, they had the same objective that I did. And that was, all of them had already had a professional career and they just wanted to give back to the community. So it was about 11 of us, and we developed this school. We're into our 3rd term now. And when we had to leave the school building last school term during the spring, it was just another day for our youngsters, because the very first day, any youngster come to school with us, we issued them a computer. Much of their work is done on the computers and programs that we bring in. And so it was very straightforward. I'm excited about the opportunities that I see being developed there, because we're trying to expose them to as much of those 6 areas, plus their normal, schoolwork, whether that's math, English, and so on, all at the same time. And in our classes, we don't just have a math class and then there's an English class and then there is a whatever. We do some of that in each one of these classes. So you might be in a science class, and because these instructors are talking to each other, either through their computers or physically, you may be doing math in the science class or science in the math class. We are a project-based school, so our youngsters are engaged in developing real-world projects that they're working on a daily basis. So that has been really, really exciting for me, and just to see the growth that I've seen in them make me say, okay, we want to stay with this. How do we do this better? And those new technologies that I were talking about earlier, we're constantly looking for, how can we bring those into the classroom? How can we use that to even get our we want to make learning fun, okay? And How can we bring that into the classroom and get them excited about this?
Now, you mentioned that your youngsters, well, excuse me, as you call them in your school, your learners,
Oh, yes.
they were well equipped for the transition to having to do virtual or distance learning. As a mother myself who is experiencing distance learning in my own household, I've noticed that the role of the parent has really stepped up.
Right.
And as we dig deeper into the recruitment of the future aviators for our industry, a big part of where we see the disconnect is the parent involvement or the parent knowledge or awareness of the different opportunities within aviation. Are there any things in particular that you're doing within your school or that you guys are learning that can better develop not only the students with their exposure, but also the parents, especially as you're approaching your very first graduating senior class this year?
Yeah, you must be reading my mind. Yes, we like I said, we've learned a lot over the last 2.5 to 3 years in this process, and you're hitting it right on the head. In that, not only do we find that we have to develop our learners, but we have to broaden more to the community. And when we think about this in an idealistic way, we're not there yet, okay? But we are developing a strategy for how we get there, of how we grow the entire community, such that we have wholesome, healthy, productive, viable communities. That means getting the parents involved. That might mean some more education for parents. I mean, like, again, my parents didn't know anything really about aviation. And in this case, for parents who may not know much or little about aviation, we want to expose them to that as well. Give them the opportunity to see where their child can grow and have a career in these, and why that's important. Our mission is we want to prepare our learners so that they be ready for college, be ready for industry, and be involved in their community. So we're looking at the holistic approach of how we develop an individual, and we want to know what are they interested in. So we try to involve our parents as much as we possibly can, realizing, again, we're in an underserved community. Many of our parents have to work, both of them have to work every single day if they're both parents in the home. And so our school opens at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'll stay there till 7 o'clock at night to allow parents to get their kids to school, go do a full day's work, come back. If they need to pick their kids up late, we have that option for them as well. By the way, at no cost to them, okay? At no cost to them for that after school care. As well as we don't have homework. Our kids get it done in the school. We know those parents are tired when they get home from work, and therefore, if any homework is going to get done in other situations, it won't be done to its max. So we realize that, we try to compensate for that. We try to build that into what we're trying to do in the classroom.
It sounds like you've really reimagined education and made it a much more holistic process and also more practical. Like you mentioned, there's not just an English class, there's English with math, and that's of course, how your job actually works once you're in a career.
Exactly.
You don't do math from 1 to 2 and English from 2 to 3. So, on this note, we wanted to talk to you about advocacy, and I think through your education mission and your involvement, you've really looked at it from a different perspective. And I think for advocacy in aviation and getting the word out to parents and young people before they're in college, when they're in grade school, is vital. And so I wonder if you could talk to us about advocacy and how you see especially young professionals' role in that area and being able to grow and change the industry from that perspective.
Yeah, with reference to education, yeah, we're trying to re-engineer and, like you said, reimagine how can we provide a learning environment such that no matter where the individual is, our philosophy is all of our youngsters can learn. Mm-hmm. and very few of them learn at the same rate. We want to meet them where they are and grow them from there at the rate at which they move, not at the rate that we think they should be moving, but at the rate they move. And with that, we have folks that last year that were in 11th grade already taking college classes, okay? At the same time, we have youngsters that are 2 and 3 grades behind. So we're trying to fill that whole spectrum of learning so that each one of them can be productive at some point after they leave from our school. So that's kind of a quick philosophy. With reference to advocacy, I think every one of us, and particularly for the young professionals that we're speaking to and speaking about here today, you have so much to offer. And that is when, for instance, when I was still in active duty in the Air Force, and I was the commander of an Air Force installation, and let me just pick one. One was in New Mexico, in a small town called Alamogordo, New Mexico. Well, there was a high school there, but I've got 4,000 individuals who are professionals on my base, plus many of them, their spouses. Many of them have college degrees. And so what we did was we said, you know what? There's no reason why any high school senior here should fail. So we partnered the entire senior class with members from my base. So we may have an airman one striper who is just in the Air Force for just over a year, but guess what? That individual has a contribution that they can make based on their experience to these individuals that are in high school. That advocacy and that consulting ability that they can give to others can be very, very inspirational. I see our young professionals, not only do they are looking and should be looking to say, okay, how do I reach higher to take my own career higher? But how do I also look back and, so to speak, and try to help to inspire others based already on what I know. And trust me, there are many times you may limit yourself in your thinking about what you know, but you already know a tremendous amount, and you can share that and grow others. And that then will give you, I think, great inspiration for how do we advocate for, not only for myself, but for all of us. And too many times we think that the pie is not big enough for all of us. There's enough in this pie for all of us, I'll guarantee you. All you have to do is get at it and find out where it is and then make it work for you.
I think that's perfect, Big, because the reason why we're even having this conversation with you today, and the reason why the Aero Club has been so supportive in having the Runway program, is exactly for what you just said. It's an opportunity for young professionals within the industry, specifically in the Washington, D.C. area, to connect with one another and the Aero Club. And then the Aero Club has an amazing Aero Club Foundation that partners with various charter schools within DC, so that we can position ourselves to be those representatives of what our industry is with that. So I just wanted to take the moment to echo that, and for all of the viewers that are watching us to, if you're not already engaged with the Runway program, this is the essence of what it's about. It's developing one another and building our network, but then also taking that opportunity, as Fig said, to reach back for the next generation and inspire them as well.
Let me join up with you on that particular point. To me, life is all about relationships, okay? It's all about networking and knowing others and getting their point of view. I can guarantee you, now there may be some of us think that we really have a corner on the market and we know it all. I can guarantee you that's a falsehood, okay? No matter who you are and where you came from. You do not have a corner on the market of all knowledge. You just don't. Therefore, this idea of opening up your aperture, getting a wider view by engaging with others, getting their perspective, and then reassessing yourself, and you're finding out that, you know what, I think I had that wrong. Here is a different approach to getting things done and making things better for all of us as human beings, as individuals, as a group, and a company that we're working for, and more importantly for this great nation that we live in.
So you've talked about networking and mentorship, where you had people from your base reach out to the high school and work with students. I think for many of us, when we're networking to reach up, the benefit is very apparent. You're trying to get something else for yourself.
Right.
And when you're more in a mentor role and reaching back, I think we tend to look at that as you're doing something good for someone behind you, but you're also receiving a benefit. Absolutely. Just from doing that. And could you talk about what, how it benefited people on your base and what you've seen as being helpful to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly for my more junior folks, when we would approach them and ask them, so what, can you go down to, will you go down to the high school and share some of your time, and where you from? How do you got to where you are? What does that really mean to you? Well, they were shy about that at first because they felt like, well, I didn't have very much to offer. But guess what? That young kid that's in school in New Mexico, okay, some of them may have never been out of Alamogordo or New Mexico. They were a Fig Newton who'd never really been in an airplane before, kind of thing. But they're going to go and tell them, and share with them, well, I happen to be from pick a place. I don't know. I live in McKinney, Texas, right outside of Dallas, or Ridgeland, South Carolina, which is where I'm from. I live near Hilton Head. But I can share with them, what I do on a daily basis? I go out, and we were flying the F-117 stealth fighter there. I go out and I work on, I'm a part of a group that works on this multi-million-dollar aircraft that has these unique characteristics to it that gives it so much capability. And I'm excited about doing that. Now they really have a conversation that they can have. So that to me is what really makes the difference. Another way to look at it, there are so many times, and it's easy to do in your more junior years, where you're thinking about all of the things that I need to acquire. And I agree that there are certain things that you do need to acquire, but having experiences are much more long lasting than the things that you're trying to say, well, I need to make enough money so I can get that, What you really want to try to do, I would suggest to you, is to see what experiences that you can get. And those experiences come with those relationships that I was talking about, whether that's you mentoring, and like you said, or someone else mentoring you. Find someone, and there are people that, there are a number of people out there that don't mind mentoring, but they may not take the opportunity to come search you out, but you could always go and search them out. Like, I'm willing to bet you they're always willing to give a hand.
How should you start that conversation? It can be intimidating to ask someone that you really respect to spend time.
Well, I think it's much easier today, though. Much, much easier today than it was, 25 or so years ago, when you approach someone today and say, you know what? I am in this specialty, and I really want to find out how to best grow and move to a different level. And you seem to have just that right touch that I think you could help me, So what you're really trying to, which you're not really trying to do, but what you really do when you do that, you then kind of put it on them. I think you're going to find very few folks, no matter who they are, what they are doing, that's going to say, oh no, get away. I don't have time to spend time. I haven't found any of those yet. As a matter of fact, I found just the opposite. When folks find that you are working hard to really develop and to really get the job done, and doing all the right kinds of things, I've found more hands reaching out to me than I ever imagined. That would be coming my way. And so I would say, don't be bashful about what could happen if anybody that's out there, and I don't expect to get 50 emails here in the next 30 seconds now, but if anybody out there said, hey, guess what? I wonder, will Fig Newton help me? And you ask me that question, what's the worst thing that could happen? Is Fig Newton say no? So then you go to the next person. Like I said, you can't give up hope here. You got to keep going. There's going to be someone along this line that's very willing to give up their time to help you. Happens all the time, all the time. Okay.
Well, Vic, I think you just gave a call to action. So you may get those 50 emails after this call. If not mentoring, maybe connecting them to
Don't give out my email. Don't give out my email. Remember, I have a school. I have 305 kids. I got enough folks to mentor right
You're
now.
mentoring enough. Now, one thing that is one of your huge accolades is that you are the very first African American Thunderbird pilot. Now, with that being said, you spoke many times in a lot of the things that you said about how representation really matters. How has that been for you to be the first to usher in something like that? As we as an industry start to talk more about the overall umbrella of diversity and inclusion, speak to what your experience was like with you being the first.
Yeah, I probably need to give a little bit of background of saying that, yeah, you know, when I was at Tennessee State, that was the first time I saw the Thunderbird demonstration team. And this was in about 1964. I went to this air show and saw these guys doing things with airplanes that seemed to be just absolutely impossible. And then probably more important than that, you know, they came taxiing in, all in formation, pulled these jets up in line. All of the canopies came up at the same time. These guys stepped out of their aircraft in their wonderful blue, flight uniform on. Right then and there, I said, when I grow up, I want to be just like one of those guys, you know? And so that's when I made it my objective and my mission and my passion to become a Thunderbird. And, you know, I'm now in my junior year or so, and I knew I was heading into the Air Force, then I was going to get in flight school or not, but I started putting in all kinds of effort. So I got into flight school, you know, got a fighter, like we said earlier, I went to Vietnam, but all of this time, I'm building hours and trying to learn how to fly formation and all of that because I wanted to be a Thunderbird. So I finally got enough hours so that I could apply for the team. And to just cut this short, I joined the team in 1974. Okay, so that's 10 years later from when I first saw them till the time I became a team member. And so I came in the first year as the voice for the team. I was the narrator and the advance person for the team. I flew the number 7 jet at that time to each location I went to and set up for the next air show and so on. And then after that first year, then I became part of the demonstration. I flew in the slot position, the number 4 position after that. So get to the point that you were asking, what was that like being, you know, that first individual that looked like me that's now pilot? Sometimes it gets a bit more difficult for me to explain kind of exactly what was happening because I was just having so much doggone fun flying airplanes. I wasn't so sure about all of the other things that were going on around me. But I would say the most important part about that were my teammates. You know, there were 8 pilots on the team. We're the only 8 Thunderbirds in the world, okay? And I get to be one of them. So there'd be many times we'd land someplace and, you know, a reporter would come up and say, well, how does it feel to be the first Black Thunderbird pilot? You know, I said, well, I'm not sure. Why don't you ask one of my teammates? Heck, I'm just being a pilot. So it wasn't that I wanted to join the Thunderbirds to be a Black Thunderbird pilot. I wanted to join the Thunderbirds and I just happened to be Black. It has always been that way, even as an officer in the Air Force, as a 4-star in the Air Force. That's the way it has been, you know. So you do carry, though, that load of the first and you don't look exactly like the rest of the team or the rest of the group. I think it's important, and that's the reason why I came up with this idea of ask my teammates. I think it's important for the group that you're in, the teammates that I had, that they have to be a part of this. They have to be a part of this experience. And so they would go and ask them and they would respond, you know, in their own way. And much of the time was, we were looking for a guy who could fly an airplane. Then after that, you know, he just happened to be one of those guys that are Black. But at the same time, and particularly when we think about you know, diversity and inclusion and all of the strife that we see that's going on in the nation today, we have to realize, I think, that there is still much work to be done here. Everybody in our nation don't get the same opportunity as everybody else, only because of the way they look, that may be the color of their skin or whatever. That's not American to me. And I'm very vocal about that. I was vocal about that when I was in the Air Force. I'm vocal about that now. There's still work for us to do here. We, when this nation was built and established, we said that we wanted to be a more perfect union. We've traveled a long ways down that road. We're still not that perfect union, so therefore we have work to do to make us that perfect union. And I'm a strong believer that we can get closer and closer to being that perfect union. Education, understanding, dialogue, all of that matters to understand where the other individual is, though, so that you can see that maybe I don't have a corner on the market here of knowing all that needs to be known about what it is to be Black in America, so to speak.
I like the point you made that when the reporter would ask you what it was like to be, the first and only African-American Thunderbird pilot, that you said, well, ask the other pilots, I'm just here to fly. Yeah. And I find, there aren't that many women in aviation. Right. And I didn't go into aviation to be a woman in aviation. I'm in aviation because I enjoy it. And I forget that there aren't a lot of us until someone brings it up. And right. So for you, I'm wondering, how should we talk about diversity? Because I think for many of us who are a minority in aviation, a lot of times it's really not relevant to us. It seems more relevant to people around us. You're exact.
Oh, see, you've been going through my head, haven't you? But you're exactly right. And I think the change in dynamics here before this very moment, and that's why I think what's happening today in our nation is so transformative, okay? Before this point in our history, I don't think we truly understood where the quote, quote, onus lie if we're gonna get to the bottom and resolve much of these issues. And it doesn't lie on you and me, okay? You as a woman in aviation, that minority person that's in aviation. So it really lies with the majority here. They have to better understand and appreciate. If they are looking for that better, that more perfect union, they have to understand and appreciate where you and I are, so that we can then be a part of that more perfect union. Until that happens, you see, they are asking, let me put it this way, they are asking you and I, and I'm gonna be very blunt about this, they're asking you and I to solve a problem that we didn't create, they did. Okay? That's the problem. And they don't realize, particularly many folks that are here listening to me today, they say, well, I didn't do anything. No, I understand that. The issue is, I need you to help undo some things. It's not that you did something, I need you to help undo some things, okay? So that's a whole reversal, I think, from the way we traditionally think about these issues. And I can tell you, if you had asked me this same question, I didn't come to appreciate and realize that, until a more recent time here, that it's not Fig Newton responsibility, okay, to go around and be sure that we get equitable opportunity for all of our citizens. Yeah, I need to do my part, but that doesn't belong to Fig Newton and all of the other Black people in America. They weren't the one who created this. Someone else did. So the someone else has to lead the effort. Plus the fact, you know what? If you and I wanted to change the policies, the laws, the regulations, you and I don't have the capability to do that. But guess what? They do. Okay? Now there's a bit of nuance there that may not be appreciated by a lot, but that's just the way it is. And I'm convinced we can do it. Okay? That's the hope. I'm convinced we can do it. But we have to do exactly what we're doing right now, not be afraid to bring the subject, put it on the table, say, hey, guess what? We're gonna have a dialogue about this. And then have that dialogue and understand, well, you know, I really didn't know, Kylie, that you really felt that way. We wanted you to be just like all of the other pilots here. But you know what? Kylie doesn't feel like she's a full team member of the team. And until we can create that environment such that all of us feel like that we are full members of the team, we have a problem.
I think that, go ahead, Callie.
Well, I was going to say, I like how you framed it as it's, you know, it's not necessarily everyone's, you know, people's problem right now that we don't have many minorities in aviation, but there's work that needs to be done to fix that.
Sure.
So, you know, that's their role. So, you know,
and let me just add, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but let me just add, and we won't fix this tomorrow.
No.
Okay. It took us, you know, pick the number of years to get here, 400 years, 450 years to get here. We won't do it in 4 hours. I guarantee you we won't do it in this hour. Okay. But we can march down this road. And if we march down this road together, we can make progress, and we can get closer and closer and closer to this.
So I was gonna follow up and ask you, you said, you know, if you're in a flight department, maybe you have one person that's a minority and they're not feeling like part of the team. Whose responsibility is it to discuss that? You know, the people who aren't minorities might have no idea. Yeah. But as the minority, it can feel awkward to say, I don't feel like I fit in.
I think that's the shift that's coming right now, Carly. I think leaders and supervisors at all levels are beginning to say, you know what, I need to ask this question. I need to know whether all of my team members feel like they are full team members. So that way you don't put the impetus then or the responsibility on the minority to put this on the table, okay? It's the responsibility of everybody else. Because guess what? I've talked with folks and they say, well, gee whiz, you know, there wasn't any problem in my organization. And the question is, have you ever asked? No, I haven't asked. Well, guess what? You're not going to ever know, because no one is, that minority that's in that organization, they're not going to step up and say something. Guess what? They want their jobs. So, and it's not, even if they did put it on the table, there's not much they can do about it. It has to be that supervisor, has to be that. That's what leadership is all about. That's a whole nother subject I could talk about.
Well, I think that it's exactly what you said though, Fig. The conversation is what's really transformative nowadays, because I feel like what's happening in the world nowadays is that even leveraging the pandemic, because people were so confined for so long, that it was a conversation that for the first time, many people who were not a part of those different minority groups or classes were forced to have to face it, you know, because it's not a part of their world. And I think that the transformation that you're seeing that will happen with those leaders within the organizations happen with what you're doing a lot with the people who sit on the board of director positions for various companies, because those conversations that are happening at the top are being mandated and pushed down for leaders to have to do that. Can you speak to some of the conversations, a part of the boards that you're with that are talking about these topics? Oh,
absolutely. Again, one more time, I will take the immediate time here. When George Floyd was killed, immediately I sit on a board, L3 Harris. That was a discussion among our board members and as well as the CEO, the COO said, okay, what we don't realize is as a result of an event like that, how is that impacting our people, okay? And if you don't ask that question, you're going to miss it. And I'll guarantee you, you will have much lower productivity than it would have been if you had stepped up and say, okay, we're going to figure out how to handle this problem. But that's what they did. We talked about it on the board. We talked about it at the highest levels in the company. They started dialogues throughout the company. People then began to feel like, you know what? We are one team and this is a problem. We're going to figure out a way. And I was just so proud of the CEO and the COO, because when they started the dialogue, it started right at the top. They said, well, you know what? I don't have the answers. And I can guarantee you none of us do. There isn't any one of us that have all of the answers to this, because there is no one answer here, okay? So I don't have all of the answers, but we together are going to work to find answers as we move along. And that's what they did. And I think that's what every company, every organization, you know, every institution have to do. They have to step back, take a look at, okay, what policies we have in place, what does that mean? How does it play among all of our employees, all of our associates, and then make decisions from there. But you have to do it as a team, not just one person thinking that I have a corner on the market, I know it all, and I'm gonna make that decision. It just don't work that way.
Well, we're at 1 o'clock, so we want to ask you one final question, and that was, what are your favorite maneuvers in the F-16 aircraft?
I don't know whether it was any one particular maneuver or not, but you know, I mean, obviously there were certain maneuvers that we loved doing, and I love doing as a part of combat training. I mean, it's because we call it the electric jet, but because it had such capabilities of putting bombs on target, and it had such capabilities of doing air-to-air dogfighting with other airplanes, because it's a 9G aircraft, you know. So I didn't have to worry about over-G'ing the aircraft. I have to worry about over-G'ing my body maybe, but not the aircraft. So being able to engage in dogfights with other aircraft with it was just absolutely extraordinary. But more than that, I probably enjoyed, probably more than anything, because, you know, I flew with the team, flying formation with it was just a joy. You didn't have to worry about having enough power to do a loop or do a roll. And it's nothing like being, you know, 4 or 5 feet from another aircraft while you're over the top doing a loop.
That's incredible. Well, thank you everyone for spending your lunch break with us. If you haven't already done so, please follow the Runway Club, Runway Program's LinkedIn account. We will use the new LinkedIn page as a way to share more information about events like this one, networking opportunities, and other information about our industry. General Newton, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. It's been just delightful to talk with you and inspirational, and we really appreciate you sharing all of your advice for young professionals like ourselves.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a terrific time. You can tell this is not a subject that I'm interested in. For all of our folks that are listening out there, if you see me anywhere, you know, various conventions or whatever, please come up and say hi. I'd love to say hi to you. And again, for both of you, I really, really enjoyed it. You asked tough questions, you know that.
We told you we were going to bring our A game, you know,
yeah,
we're
yes.
the legend today.
and you did. Well, thanks so much. Take care and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank
You too.
you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.